Chapter 19 Parents. Gramarye Mansion, Hell. Issei stretched, listening to his body, feeling his muscles stiffen and joints crack as he awoke into reality for the first time since regaining his own form within his mindscape. After returning from the memory with Rias, Issei had attempted to awaken himself but had stopped at Draeg's insistence that he allow his body to rest. While he was capable of movement within his mind, his physical body was still in a weakened state and needed recovery. His naturally high metabolic and genealogical healing rate combined with the devil magic and surgery could only enhance the process so much. So it was that the scion had spent close to another 36 hours living only within the realm of his mind. Rias came and went as she had to. She updated him on the occurrences of Kiba and Aquino's group. When last she had left, Aquino had departed for northern France and Issei was eager to find out how she had gone. He had full faith in his girlfriend to succeed. Of course, while in his mind the scion had trained. There was no chance that he wouldn't test himself out after recovering. He felt strangely powerful and noted it to Draeg while training in an enhanced gravity of almost 115 times that of Earth. The great dragon had made some soft mutterings about his body adapting but had seemed wholly disinterested in discussing the issue. It didn't matter to Issei. He was alive, he felt stronger than ever, was training hard and had a goal. Well, two goals, but they linked together. Become a Super Saiyan and defeat Biko. His loss would be remedied. The first thing he noticed as he opened his eyes was that he was in hell, specifically the Gramarye Mansion. Issei had never been in the room that he awoke in but recognized the furnishings and wallpaper as well as the garden that was manicured to perfection outside the open window beside his bed. A smirk crossed his face briefly at the idea of another spar within Surzeka's yard. Most likely that would drive the Lord of Hell irate. Issei had a habit of destroying the place each time he so much as entered it. These thoughts were wiped away swiftly though by the growl of his stomach. It had been over 2 days since he had eaten and his stomach was more than willing to let him know about it. In a single motion, he threw the covers back from the soft bed that he lay upon and stepped out of the bed. He was dressed in a dark soft fabric pants and nothing else. His bare muscular chest quivered slightly as he rolled out his shoulders and strode for the door. The cool touch of the floorboards adding a nice contrast to the warm air that filled the mansion. The key of each person hummed softly within the rooms of the Gramarye Mansion. In fact, Issei found that as he strode the halls, he could feel the key of devils all around. In other mansions, parts of the city and further out. He wasn't sure how far the range of his ability went, but it was easily many kilometers. To some it would seem overwhelming to feel that much life. But with practice, it was now like a background hum to the young man, just one of the many factors that made up the world around him, like the passing of cars on a busy road. Focusing briefly, he noted the presence of those within the building. Rias and Aquino together in Rias' room. Kiba and Asia in Kiba's. Kaneko, Sarah, and Irina present in rooms of their. With further thought on the key he felt, his senses told him that Rias' parents were present but her brother and Grafia were not. It was entirely likely that the pair were busy attending to issues that simply couldn't wait. Other key filled the house that moved around, servants and staff that Issei had met, as well as those he hadn't. Identifying who was only possible when he was aware of who each signature was. It had amused him slightly when he had realized that each person had a different key signature, similar to how each person has a unique fingerprint. As he entered the main foyer of the mansion, a thought went through his mind that caused him to pause in his quest for the kitchen. Both his girlfriends were upstairs. He hadn't seen Aquino in a few days and neither Rias in the physical world, although she had visited him within his mind a few times. Each time lecturing him about resting and recovering when she found him pushing him out further and further. He was certain that she had expected him to ignore her objections to his training, but he still smiled at the way she cared. A small battle erupted within the scion's mind as he pondered between eating first or seeing the two girls whom he gave his heart first. With a smile to one of the servants that hurried past the topless scion, he diverted his course and began to walk up the stairs. Would the girls realize the sacrifice he was putting his stomach through in seeing them first, he pondered? Probably not. His tail waved lazily through the air behind him as Issei made his way to Ria's room. The thick darkwood doors closed and cream blinds pulled shut. Issei floated himself from the floor slightly and slipped into the room unheard. The dull light of the room made no difference to the scion's eyesight, and he floated until coming to a stop above the pair of beautiful young women curled into each other on the bed. Pulling the comforter from their bodies subtly, Issei admired the two gorgeous figures. Both lay curled into each other in nightgowns of flowing, almost see-through material. The negligee accentuating the beauty of their bodies and causing his mouth to dry momentarily. Issei wet his mouth briefly and swallowed as he drank in the sight of them both. No matter how many times he saw them, the scion was always amazed by the sheer depth of the stunning complexions. The dark hair of Aquino mixed with the crimson of Rias, just as the turquoise of Rias' nightie flowed into the light almost pure white of Aquino's. Their skin met where the girls embraced each other as they slept, and Issei could not think of a more beautiful sight. His eyes noticed the bruising that accompanied Aquino on her legs, arms and shoulders. A bandage present under the left side of her body that was pressed into the bed. Concern marked his face as he saw these marks. He knew the girls were tough, but seeing injuries on either of them caused him to grit his teeth with concern and anger at those who would impose them. He ran hands over each bruise gently, confirming for himself that there were no serious injuries. With his concern alleviated, he returned to hovering above the pair, his hands outstretched and stroking a cheek present of each girl. Neither so much as raised a breath at his touch, clearly deep in their sleep and comforted in their embrace. He remained that way for almost a minute before his mind began formulating ways to wake the girls below him. A romantic gesture would be what both would want, but that wasn't what brought a mischievous grin to the young warrior's face. He glanced upward to confirm the height of the ceiling before slightly rolling Aquino ever so slowly to check the bandaged wound. While he wanted to have fun, he wouldn't risk hurting her. The bandage itself proved to simply be a precaution, as the wound itself was healed over, with only red skin present. Likely the work of Asia or the resident medical staff. Happy that he wouldn't hurt them, Issei dropped enough to let his lips graze the foreheads of both girls before pulling back and floating to the edge of the bed. His arms took a firm grasp of both sides of the end of the mattress, and Issei let a small trickle of ki blow into the plush mattress, enough to assist his grip of the expensive bedding and ensure that he didn't simply tear it in two. Content with his preparations, he filled his lungs before wrenching the mattress upward and bellowing at the top of his lungs. "Rise and shine, sleepy heads!" His words loud and reverberating off the walls as both girls were tossed up into the air. Screams filled the room as both young women found themselves airborne, the room filled with the yells of their boyfriend before crashing down, sprawled out on the bed again. Both were stunned momentarily before the sound of Issei's raucous laughter snapped each of their sights onto him. Issei was almost bent over double as he watched first surprise, then confusion, and finally anger filled the faces of both girls as their vision turned to daggers poised at him. "What the hell, Issei? You arsehole!" simultaneously screamed at him from both girls as they leapt out of the bed toward him. Issei leant back as both girls fired themselves at him before pivoting forward and catching each girl in one arm each. Before either could react, he floated himself up and rolled. Now floating close to the 11-foot ceiling, Issei held each girl in an arm, his elbows hooked under their armpit and hands firmly holding their backs. His legs wrapped around their own, preventing either girl from sagging or falling. Both girls began to beat on him with their fists. Despite their anger, the hits were not hard. They had no desire to actually hurt the boy, even if they probably couldn't. Both were still fuming when Issei finally spoke up. "Good morning, my gorgeous loves. I just had to start this day with the most beautiful women in hell wrapped up in my arms." His voice sincere and the hints of laughter gone from his throat, he accentuated his expression by planting his lips onto Aquino's. The girl resisted for only the briefest moment before melting into his kiss, his tail raising up and brushing into Ria's cheek while she nuzzled her face into his collarbone. Finally parting their tongues, Issei broke the kiss with Aquino and replaced it with Rias. The red-haired girl put up no resistance and embraced him fully while Aquino ran her tongue up his neck and her hands down his back. She sighed subtly as words left her mouth. "I just can't stay mad with you." Her voice a husky pout. Issei let his lips leave Rias as he returned both women to the ground, the trio's feet touching the ground as one. I have missed being with you both so much. How could I not want to spend every waking moment with either of you? Issei's words and rhetorical question bringing content blushes to the teen girls' faces. Feeling as if he had gotten away with his little prank, Issei was beginning to lead them to the door when Rias stopped him with her words. Well, I forgive you, but I'm not helping you with your mum. Issei stopped and froze at that sentence. Both girls were behind him and he turned to see identical evil expressions across both of their faces as he felt his own go pale. Once again his mouth felt clammy, but now for a completely different reason. My mum. He stated, what do you mean, my mum? Issei held his voice level, but the terror of what his parent could be planning or what she might do was filling his mind. Rias had mentioned that the cat was out of the bag with relation to supernatural forces and that Surzex had been busy dealing with the aftermath, but he wasn't prepared for what it could entail with his own parents, specifically his mother. Rias moved over to her bedside cabinet and opened the top drawer. She then pulled out Issei's phone before handing it to the saiyan. He hadn't been worried in the slightest about the device, something that he definitely didn't share with the majority of their generation. You should check your messages. Rias stated with her evil smile intact as Issei swiped the phone open. Both girls watched as he read through his mother's messages before clicking play on the voicemails and instantly moving the phone away from his ear at the sound of her irate voice. His face became blank while internally he panicked. He had all this immense power now and could do things that were truly amazing. His strength, power, skills and capabilities were beyond anything he previously would have imagined, and yet now he felt as small as a mouse when faced with the wrath of his angered mother. His mind drew up nothing but blank options when he quickly ran over how he was going to get out of this predicament. He focused onto Drake. Before he could even postulate the question, the dragon spoke up. Oh no. I am not helping there. Your mother is for you to deal with and I will be sealing myself in for that one. Thank you very much. The great dragon's tone made it clear that he meant what he said. Issei couldn't help but shake his head with a slight laugh. Both he and Drake were not prepared to deal with her. But that could wait, his stomach couldn't. He let his eyes return to the girls as a somewhat confident grin came to him. Well damn, looks like I'm screwed and not in the way you would both enjoy. A blush and puffed cheeks were sent back his way in response. I guess I will just have to face the music, but first. Breakfast. Issei exclaimed the last word loudly as he grabbed each other girls' hands and pulled them from the room. His phone tossed carelessly onto Rias' bed. Leading the way the halls of the mansion toward what Issei believed was one of his favorite rooms, the sounds of showers and the occupants stirring filled the background air. The key of Issei's friends and others moved about as they began their days. While Issei was more than comfortable to walk barefoot through the mansion in nothing but a pair of sweatpants, his girlfriends were not, and so with a slight draw of both their magic, each replaced their alluring Nejilaji with comfortable clothing, all the while never slowing down or letting go of the scion's hands. Issei registered the change in the clothing of each woman on either side of him but made no comment. His stomach was in full control at this moment. Closing into the stairs leading down to the kitchen, a door opened and Sarah exited. Her young girl appeared tired and slightly disheveled with her hair sticking out at messy angles and face stretched in a large yawn. Morning, Sarah. The three called out as they approached. The young girl turned to greet them, Wyatt strapping her arms around Akino's midriff, who came to a stop to return the hug. Good morning. Why was there yelling? The young girl asked with a tired expression. It woke me up. Akino simply ran a hand over Sarah's head, tickling her hair while Rias replied. Issei, blame Issei. The scion himself responded with a cheeky smile, guilty, but now you can have breakfast so you know, good times. He responded. At this point he really did consider trading the comfort of sleep for food was a winning situation, but the look on Sarah's face said she didn't entirely agree. With the group on the move again, Sarah slipped her hand into Akino's and walked alongside the older girl. She felt more comfortable with everyone now, especially after the events of the last 2 days. However, Akino and Kaneko were definitely the pair she felt most at home with. Kaneko was quickly becoming her best friend while Akino was the older sister and motherly figure she had always wanted. Her relationship with Ravel had even improved, the pair no longer icy toward each other. Being united against people that are trying to kill you often had that effect. Entering the dining room, each girl took a seat while Issei went and knocked on the door to the kitchen. Before waiting, he opened it up and looked inside. A member of the kitchen staff, a cook who Issei knew as Rune, looked over to him. "Oh Issei, you are up and moving. I suppose you are here for breakfast then." His words polite and the tone clearly happy to see the scion mobile again. "Sure am, I have Rias, Akino, and Sarah with me. I'm sure others will be down soon. But while I am extra hungry, haven't eaten in a few days, do you think you could make more than usual?" Issei asked with a carefree tone to his question. In normal terms, asking for a little extra food would seem reasonable after 2 days of nothing, but the staff already prepared meals capable of sating the scion's appetite, and so the poor man stopped his preparation of the stovetops to look over at the happy scion, his words coming out slowly as if trying to fathom the ramifications. "You want me to make more?" Not really a question, more of a worry. Issei smiled before replying, "Yes please, maybe double or 3 times if possible. I'm starving." He decided to leave at that, his last glimpse, one of horror on the man's face as he began to yell out for more staff to come assist with making the mountain of food that had been requested. Returning to sit between his 2 girlfriends at the table, Issei let out of a breath before looking at the both of them in turn, and at once his face morphed into a serious expression. "So tell me," he began, "how did northern France go? The last I was told, you were going to search for Riser." Issei's words directed to Akino, and the jovial nature of the room was gone from his words. He could tell that all his friends had survived, but seeing the bruises on both Akino and Sarah, he knew that the fighting must have been rough. At his inquiry, Akino's face fell, not much but enough for him to notice, and Sarah began to fidget with the cutlery that was waiting on the table. Her expression read that she wasn't too keen to discuss what had happened while her group had been away. Akino considered her words and Issei waited patiently for her to speak. "It didn't go how we had planned. I already gave the details to Rias, Surzex, and Grafia. Asia and Kiba know as well, they helped my group when we came in last night. I will fill you in when everyone else comes down, okay?" Akino responded. Her smile didn't quite reach the edges of her face, and Issei could tell that something was troubling her. He placed his hand on her shoulder while smiling a grin that told her that he would make everything right. Also concerned for her, Rias moved around to hug her from behind. "No worries. It can wait," Issei replied in a calm manner. He didn't need to be able to mind read to tell that whatever had occurred had been unpleasant for both girls. His mind drifted as the group waited in silence. Neither older girl spoke, simply leaning on either side of the scion that they had been afraid to lose. Akino hummed in content while looking over to Sarah in a caring manner. Issei's mind drifted to what Rias had told him about Kiba's encounter. They had been successful in part, but even so, the action had not gone well. Maybe it had been a bad idea to split up into teams after all. Issei thought on this before speaking again softly. "How's Irina doing?" He didn't know the girl very well, but still he would never have wished for Zenobia to die or for Irina to have gone through that pain. "Not well," Rias responded solemnly. There wasn't much to add to that, and Issei didn't push the matter. He knew that their heavenly allied was still in the mansion. He could feel her ki above in a bedroom. She was moving around and her ki pulsed with strong emotions, but he had asked hoping that maybe Rias had been able to help. It had been a long shot though. The silence returned for but a moment before dozens of plates stacked with food began to materialize on the table. Everything anyone could want for breakfast was stacked high on large plates or bowls. Dozens of pancakes and waffles with every topping imaginable, eggs of all kinds, bacon, ham, sausage, grilled tomatoes, hash browns, various rice dishes, 2 whole chickens, moutons of toast, cereals, and then other food that had clearly been intended for lunch but appropriated to feed the scion, roast meats of all kinds, curries, Thai chilies and burritos, tacos and a few fish meals. Instantly Issei's mouth watered and his instincts screamed at him to dig right in, yet he held himself firm. He watched as each of the girls filled up a plate of what they could want while he simply salivated. The standing rule being that he always ate last, or there was a strong possibility that no one else might get the option to have anything. With the sound of cutlery cutting into food commencing from the three girls, Issei dug in. A whole chicken vanished within moments of being pulled toward him, followed by a large grilled salmon. In the course of only a few minutes, a stack of plates began to pile in front of the voraciously all-consuming warrior. Sarah focused intently on her own meal, determined not to watch Issei vacuum his food into his mouth while neither Rias nor Aquino were affected by his eating habits anymore. They had simply grown to become accustomed to it. It was just who Issei was. More food appeared to replace everything ravaged by the saiyan, who showed no signs of slowing down as the main doors to the dining room opened. Issei had been paying mild attention to the moving key within the mansion and so was aware of the large group approaching the room. His attention remained solely on his food as chairs moved and people joined the table. "Ah, good to see you, Issei." Kiba spoke up, which earned a happy thumbs up from the scion, but no words, the Gremory Knight simply smiling and shaking his head at the scion's single-minded devotion to eating. "Was clothing optional to breakfast this morning?" the knight joked offhandedly while deliberately teasing the scion. Issei's only response being to shift the arrangement of his fingers from a thumbs upward to something more abrupt toward the knight. Kiba smirked at his win over Issei. Greetings flowed around the room as chairs were filled. The last few members entered the room, key that Issei didn't recognize but at this moment was too focused to worry about. Sebastian and Marie had never seen anything like the sight that they witnessed before them. Sitting between Rias and Aquino was a boy of roughly the same age. He was seated but clearly tall and very muscular, almost as if his body had been carved by the Greek gods of Olympus. He was bare-chested, barefoot and wore only a dark pair of pants. Dark brown messy hair and a thick long furred tail of the same color lazily flopped over the rear of his chair. In front of him sat a mountain of empty plates that could contain enough food to feed the rest of the mansion for a few days, possibly a week, and yet still this young man ate at a phenomenal rate. In the moment that both had watched, a whole rack of roast lamb ribs was consumed, the clean bones all that remained, and yet still her shoveled down a half-dozen bowls of rice and ramen before continuing. Sebastian was morbidly curious and impressed while Marie was disgusted. In all the years of her life she had never seen something like this. "You must be Issei," the Frenchman stated in a friendly manner with his hand held out as he took the seat opposite Issei. Ravel and Marie choosing to be to either side of him. His fellow French devil remaining standing as Ravel chose to sit. She had come to understand that the Gremory household was very relaxed and was not taken to worrying about formal etiquette. She still, however, found Issei's eating habits unnerving and so focused her eyes away while helping herself to an enjoyable breakfast. The scion in question brought his eyes up from the bowl that he was ravaging and went to confirm and greet the man before him when he caught a look of Aquino's glare. He turned his face away to be greeted by a similar response from Rias. Both girls allowed him quite a bit of leniency, but some manners had to be maintained. Issei swallowed his mouthful and ensured his mouth empty before placing down his bowl, wiping his hands on a napkin and standing up. "Sure am," he stated in a happy tone, his mood very elated from the filling of his belly, as he shook the hand of the man before him. The devil's grip was firm and Issei reciprocated enough to gauge the man's strength. Happy with the handshake, Issei turned to the young woman beside the light-haired man. Before Issei could speak, Rias stood and introduced the woman to him. "Issei, this is Lady Marie Le Barton. She is an esteemed noble from France and her family's assistance was of great help to Aquino. House Gremory is in great debt to them." Rias spoke with grace and hoped that her tone would allow Issei to realize to be polite and try to present a positive image of himself. Marie simply curtsied while responding. "Thank you, Lady Gremory. Those were lovely words. Surely you do not owe us anything in these times." Issei could hear the tones in her voice. She was both sincere and yet also saddened. He wasn't really sure how to respond to these formal talks with a woman before him that he didn't know and so responded as himself. "Nice to meet ya." A loud slap filled the air and Aquino planted her hand into her own forehead and laughter could be heard barely stifled from Kaneko, Asia and Kiba. Sarah, although like Issei would often struggled with formal nuance, could also tell that the warrior boy had chosen his choice poorly for the situation. Ravel shook her head while continuing to eat, and Irina simply ate quietly, preferring to avoid these social interactions. Issei looked around the table at the group before picking up a lemon-coated chicken leg, tearing a portion off, shallowing and continuing. "Ah look, I'm useless with pretty much all formal stuff. I just don't really get it. But it is nice to meet you both," he responded before smiling, sitting and returning to the food before him. Marie and Sebastian both seated themselves while unsure how to respond to the scion. Neither had dealt with someone like him before, and they could tell by the way both Rias and Aquino looked at him that the pair of Gremory ladies were quite taken with the young man. Sebastian had to admit that he found the man's directness refreshing, whereas Marie didn't find him rude, simply unrefined. Ravel, however, was less forgiving of his lack of refined graces and chose to speak her mind. Possibly it wasn't her place, but she just had to say what she was currently thinking. "But why aren't you wearing any clothes?" she let out while cutting the food on her plate. Issei looked across to her with a smirk. "Well, I haven't eaten in 2 days. Priorities come first. And besides, I am wearing pants. Pants are clothes." Ravel was unable to retort at his line of reasoning as both Rias and Aquino looked aghast at his response, Kaneko, Kiba, Asia and Seraph laughing fully at his lastest response, and even a subtle giggle coming from Irina. Sebastian smiled to Ravel, who returned his smile with a shake of her head before returning to her food. "I know he can be rough around the edges," Aquino began while Issei returned to eating, "but that's part of his charm." She finished with a wave of her hand and a white singlet materialized on the scion. Issei looked at her with a smirk. It was clear Aquino had chosen the singlet to be enough to dress him but still show of how muscular he was. Aquino knew how to tease people. Rias caught her girlfriend's eye and the two shared a look of agreement on the matter before returning to their own food at a normal pace. Conversation filled the air as the group all chatted about inconsequential subjects while the food was eaten. Finally finished, Issei placed down his cutlery for the last time, every morsel of food consumed and close to 100 bowls and plates stacked in front of and around him. The dirty plates, cups, cutlery and other utensils all vanished moments later to reveal a clean and empty table. The magic of the mansion having taken care of the clean-up. Rias cleared her throat and everyone turned to face the Gremory heiress. "I understand that there are quite a few questions regarding the events that have occurred over the past 4 days. I know that I was quite shocked by the developments even as I witnessed them unfold. Short debriefings have occurred, however I believe that a full one should occur now, to place everyone on the same platform and allow us to make more informed decisions about our actions in the future. Our enemies, those that unite all of us, have proven that their objectives and operations are larger and more sinister than previously expected." Silence filled the air as Rias spoke. Her words hung in the air briefly upon finishing as the doors to the room once again opened, her parents moving into the room before Rias continued. "I know that events have been moving rapidly and this isn't how anyone would have predicted that our expeditions would turn out. So I would like to..." Her words were cut off as her parents moved around behind her, with her father clapping a hand on Issei's shoulder and her mother embracing him like a lost child that had found his way home. Rias was dumbstruck for a moment at her parents' behavior. She knew they could both be a tad over-friendly and compassionate, but she didn't quite expect this and found her train of thought thrown off by their behavior. Her mother looked up at her with a deadpan expression. "Don't worry about us, sweetie, we are just making sure how future son-in-law is alright before you do the debriefing." The effect of her words was instantaneous. Both Rias and Issei's faces burned a bright red while the scion himself froze and the heiress began to jumble up anything that threatened to come from her mouth. Aquino had a smug look that was wiped away the moment Zeoticus lifted up Aquino into a hug, his words loud and clear. "We can't have our new daughter-in-law forgotten either." Aquino immediately joined in going red while laughter erupted once again from the remaining members of Rias' peerage. Neither parents, concerned for the commotion they were causing and simply each checking over Aquino and Issei for any lasting injuries while stating their intention to ensure that both Rias' partners were of full health. Rias could not state how embarrassed she felt. She wasn't aware that her parents would declare her relationships in front of others. It wasn't like she tried to hide it but also didn't particularly want to flaunt it. Looking around the room, she took in different expressions: smirks from her peerage, confusion from the Lubarton devils, and disinterest from Irina and Ravel. Her mind clicked over and she decided to take control of the situation.
Well, relationships aside, with my parents here we can start with proper introductions of everyone prior to the debriefing.
She attempted, and only partially succeeding in regaining her composure, and so directed her words at her father.
Father, if you would begin, please.
Her parents removed themselves from her stunned lovers and moved to the head of the room, her father introducing himself, followed by her mother. The introductions then moved around the room, prominently for the Lubarton devils, Ravel and Irina. However, everyone had their turn. Once complete, Rias took center stage at the front with a look on her face that invited her parents to sit down and dared them to choose not to.
Now that introductions are concluded, Kiba, can you covered everything that occurred in Peru?
The Gremory Knight rose to his feet as Rias summoned a remote control to her hand. The control fit within her palm snugly, and through a series of buttons, controlled an array of holographic displays that lit up in the room. Passing the small black controller to Kiba, she sat down and allowed him to take over. Kiba cleared his throat before beginning, partly to allow himself to speak clearer but mostly to relieve himself of the butterflies that had decided to suddenly live in his stomach. Fighting was no issue for him, but public speaking, even to small groups, was not something he enjoyed. My team's objective was to investigate the sightings of Rogue Grigori operating out of the capital of Peru, Lima. We arrived without incident, however quickly found the streets a lot emptier than expected. Initial investigations found that the Rogue Grigori's human allies were coercing large group of citizens into working for them. We suspected magical control and so observed their main base of operations. A press of the controller and an image of the Basilica Cathedral de Lima appeared in all the holographic monitors. We observed the cathedral to be occupied by a large cohort of Rogue Grigori and humans that were enthralled.
Upon infiltration, we discovered these cross totems.
Another image replaced the previous. This image was a short video showing the bewitched people building the totems and sacrificing themselves to it. The totems drain the life from people in a similar manner to the spell used by Riser in both the raiding game and when murdering his own peerage. Kiba paused a moment and locked eyes with Ravel. Her cold stare showed only disgust at the mention of her brother before the night continued. Our suspicion of spell work was confirmed and we were forced to use force so that we could breach the catacombs of the cathedral, and when we reached the innermost cloisters we found the culprits. The image shifted once again to show Fried Selzen, the image displaying him as a man. His face still twisted manically. Fried was commanding the operation, draining the life from people that he bewitched so that he could form these. Once again the image shifted and a crate of the dark crystals came into view. These crystals are what form from the collected essence of the people drained of their life. The red mist coalesces together into these solid forms. The crystals hum with energy, and during our encounter, Fried utilized some to become a twisted creature. The image once again shifted to show the beast that Fried Selzen had become.
We slew him, however as that beast he possessed far more formidable fighting skills. I would wager that had he been a more dangerous foe to begin with, then the outcome may have been even more detrimental for my team than it was. We lost one of our own facing him, and I have no idea how many crystals they created or to where exactly they exported them. Kiba handed the remote to Aquino, who assumed his position at the front of the room with the images on the projector fading. My team was sent to Paris to investigate sightings of Riser Phoenix. Arriving, we realized that making contact with a local lord would be advisable, however we did not know where to find such individuals. Luckily, the idea was floated to do a public service of hunting any rogues found that we knew would draw attention from the local authorities and grant us the meeting we sought. We succeeded in finding a rather nasty local rogue, and after slaying it, met with Sebastian. Sebastian accepted our request and escorted my team to the Lubarton mansion. Now an image of the Lubarton mansion filled the projectors as Aquino continued. Upon arrival, we were introduced to Lady Marie, her late father Duc John Lubarton, and her house staff. They invited us into their home openly and with further explanations to the circumstances of our arrival in France, readily agreed to lend us aid. First in the form of treating Kaniko's wounds and then in helping to identify Reiser's motives.
Sebastian successfully narrowed down Reiser's location through sightings and local intelligence to the Battery Daysville in Normandy. It was a preserved German fortification from the Second World War built atop an ancient Roman fort. The image now changed once more to show a slideshow of various images of the fort and the catacombs found within. With Kaniko unable to accompany us, Sebastian filled in and our group made its way to the site. Within we encountered a group led by Reiser who included a necromancer capable of raising a large contingent of the dead against us. The images shifted to a few captured of the zombies and skeletons that had attacked the group as well as the tattooed necromancer. True to form, Reiser gloated of his setting us up, his plan to assault House Le Barton and his machinations for our death. We were delayed in dealing with his Legion of the Dead but made our way to the Le Barton mansion as soon as we were able. Arriving at the mansion, we found the estate encompassed within a potent magical shell that we were unable to break. However, Sebastian was able to circumnavigate our way inside. At Aquino's mention, an image of one of Sebastian's rift appeared. Once inside, we discovered the mansion besieged by not only the Grigori forces aligned with Reiser but also creatures of the abyss. The twisted flesh horrors, imps and harpies replaced the rift on the holograms. The assault was heavy and large portions of the mansion destroyed. House Le Barton took heavy casualties and it is clear that the attack had been planned and coordinated for quite a long time, far before we arrived in France. We fought through the mansion, arriving to find Lady Marie, Coquino and Duc Le Barton engaged with Reiser, a larger twisted demon capable of regeneration, and the Duc in a duel with Cocobile himself. The image twisted to show first the traitorous Phoenix, then the twisted demon and finally the rogue Grigori leader. Aquino's words changing to a harsh tone at the mention of the man she truly despised. Despite the best efforts of our combined group, we were unable to defeat Reiser or the twisted creature. We did however cause severe casualties to their forces, and while they were able to bring in a steady flow of abyssal minions, their losses in Grigori members will hinder their future operations. Aquino paused briefly and looked to the Le Barton devils sympathetically. I regretfully report that Duc Le Barton was killed by Cocobile. An awkward pause filled the air with members of the peerage offering their condolences to Marie and Sebastian. With Sebastian's assistance, our group was able to escape the enemy forces. However, the amassed swarm of demons unleashed on Paris was quite substantial and I am unsure how much damage was caused by them. Aquino passed the remote over to Rias, who took up the central position within the front of the room. Thank you both for the summary of endeavors. The final is of the time spent by myself and issei in Moscow. By now I assume everyone here has seen the footage that is spread throughout the human internet services. A murmur of confirmation filled the room. That makes this far simpler. Issei and I quickly found Valley with Issei's ability to track the life force of individuals. Valley confirmed himself to be the vessel of Albion, the White Dragon Emperor. Despite my preference for diplomacy, Ria shot Issei an annoyed look. The two dragon bearers came to blows with Issei easily outpacing Valley. Victory appeared swift, however Valley was able to alert his scion compatriot who intervened. Again diplomacy was discounted, although I suspect asking two scions to play nice was never likely to happen. A smirk graced Issei's face that morphed into a scowl as Rias' recount of the fight continued. Biko and Issei proceeded to take their fight to the air. The conflict moved to an industrial sector in eastern Moscow where Issei was able to drive Biko to the ground. Biko was not defeated and utilized a technique unseen by us previously but captured in some of the intelligence footage shown by Grafia previously. A golden form known simply as the Super Saiyan. You all saw how the battle ended. Rias finished her report and prepared to move the discussion along when Issei spoke up. Next time I will win. That was the only time Biko will ever best me. I will attain the Super Saiyan soon and then he won't be able to stop me. Issei declared this firmly and his face showed anger and wrath that was usually only reserved for his opponents in the midst of battle. Rias interjected to both calm her boyfriend and allow the full group to know that there was at least something of a plan for tackling Biko if they had to again. That is plausible. Issei and I observed a memory given by Drake of two past scions training.
the first as a super saiyan causing the second to achieve the transformation. But that is not the point of this meeting. So let's get back on track. Issei nodded to Rias and resumed listening, however his mind wandered to attaining the super saiyan form. In his fight with Biko, it had allowed his opponent to completely outclass him. The even fight had flipped to such an extent that he had been completely unable to deliver any form of effective resistance. Biko had completely defeated him, and such actions humiliated him. Next time it would be Biko who lay broken on the ground. There was some fortunate outcomes of our encounter with Vala and Biko though. I highly suspect that the pair are operating independently and do not hold allegiance to Kokobile or the Grigori. This is obviously good fortune for us, as while they are not our allies, they are not our enemies either. A quick glance at Issei proved that he disagreed with her final statement. In response to the demons unleashed on Paris, vanguard forces from Lord Surzex, Serafal and Ajuka have been dispatched and contained the enemy. Human casualties were regretfully high. Focused on the area surrounding the Lubarton mansion, acting as the epicenter of demons' expansion. In line with minimizing enemy activity, the vanguard forces discarded secrecy in favor of open shows of force against the enemy. This so far has had mixed reactions, with humans being largely unable to differentiate our forces from the enemy and being both hostile and scared of all supernatural forces. Grafia is in discussions with various heads of Devil households to liaise with human heads of government. Lord Michael has also provided a detachment of forces from heaven that are assisting in both extermination and containment efforts in Paris, as well as assistance in Peru. Rias changed the images on the projector to those of Lima. The images showed angels and devils conducting cleanup operations and restricting access to the cathedral. Furthermore, our combined forces have so far been able to contain the outbreak of enemy operations within Lima as well. Locals have very little memories of their time enthralled, however once again the human reaction to our combined presence has been less than ideal. Fortunately, violence has been to a minimum. This however may not always be the case, as anger over the treatment of the innocent citizens increases. Liaison with local officials is most likely the course of action that will avoid further violence, and to that end, Lord Michael has provided delegates to the area. Rias closed the holographic displays. My brother is grateful for all the assistance we have been able to achieve thus far. The enemy's operations have been exposed, and now large-scale forces are able to be brought against them. It is regretful that millennia of secrecy has been undone, but perhaps this will assist us against Kokobile's elements. We have been officially stood down from assisting further in these matters. Follow-on operations will be handled by the joint vanguard forces of my brother and Lord Michael. The look on Issei's face told Rias that he didn't agree with being sidelined from this fight. Wait a second, we are being benched. We can still be of use. We are one of the strongest peerages out there. Not to mention we have the most experience in dealing with these asshats so far. Issei's voice was full of clear indignation at the idea that he wouldn't fight against the enemy. It wasn't Rias who responded though, but Ravel. Surely you are not so arrogant as to think that you are that strong. I admit to being impressed by how well everyone from the peerage has fought so far, but there is no way that you are a match for what our enemy can do. Before Issei could respond, Sebastian spoke up, clearing the air with his voice and bringing all the attention in the room to himself. If I may, Lady Gremory, he began to Rias, who nodded. The enemy are quite powerful. I wholeheartedly agree with Lady Phoenix's views on this matter. I was most impressed with how well each of the members of House Gremory and Lady Phoenix fought, but I cannot see how endangering the lives of a peerage who are still in their school years would be of any value. None of us were able to defeat Riser, and certainly Kokobile is more powerful than he. It stands to reason that it would take the power of the Satans, or as unpleasant as it is to say, an archangel, to silence the threat he poses. Marie and Ravel nodded at his while Irina looked to be of some agreement. Sebastian noted the looks across the Gremory peerage members' faces though, it wasn't what he had expected. They appeared to disagree and seemed confident that they could win. No more so than the muscular young man before him. Issei smirked as he responded, "You seem to be a little out of the loop. I've already defeated Riser once. Beat him as both a man and then in his giant roasted bird form that he chose to take, and if you think that he has grown more powerful and could stop me now, then you are very much mistaken. I have taken my training to a whole new level, gravity far over 100 times now. Every member of this peerage trains harder and smarter than any other, so I think we could very much deal with them. And as for that twisted angel, I think my fists will enjoy breaking him. Issei's words dripped with confidence, and while it was clear that Ravel and Marie took it as arrogance and bravado, every member of the Gremery household knew that he could back up what he said. Sebastian was stumped slightly by the brashness of the scion's claims and confused slightly by what he had said. Gravity of 100? He said with confusion, surely you don't intend to face Kokobile or Riser alone. Issei's response came swiftly, and while Rias or Aquino would have liked to temper his words, they knew there was no point. Of course I will. Roast chicken has nothing on me, and Kokobile will be a nice training bout before or after dealing with Biko. As for the gravity... Issei's smirk grew when this time was joined by Kiba and Kaneko, who also hailed the benefits of the chamber greatly. Aquino and Rias kept their faces more disciplined, although the black-haired beauty's eyes showed that she greatly enjoyed these responses of Issei's. Grafia built us a chamber where we can augment the gravity of the rooms to above that of Earth's or other environments. It allows for far greater training. Just one of the nice training techniques I learned from the memories of my ancestors. Sebastian had never heard of such a method for training and looked to Marie and Ravel. Both women confirmed that they hadn't either, although now Ravel knew why the Gremery Devils had been so much stronger in the rating game after only a fortnight's training. And just how much do you all augment the gravity while you train? Sebastian asked while choosing to ignore Issei's comments of facing their foes alone. The brash nature of the scion seemed to him to be something that he wore with pride. Kaneko replied while pointing at Kiba, we train in close to 40 times that of Earth at the moment. Sarah motioned to herself and Asia, 15 times for us, but we are getting up there. Sebastian's eyes had widened at these claims. Neither himself nor Marie knew how to respond at what these devils who weren't even adults yet were putting themselves through. His focus landed on Aquino and Rias. We can push ourselves up to around 34 times that of Earth, Aquino stated. Sebastian then looked back to Issei, and you said that you train in 100 times that of Earth. The scion shook his head. Nope, I said beyond that. I am currently pushing myself to reach 120 times. 115 is feeling comfortable. With my weighted clothes, I want to push 150 times within the next week. Neither Labart and Devil responded to that. It was beyond insane, and the strength, stamina and capability required for something like that was absurd. Add into the equation the concept of weighted training clothes to which Sebastian was familiar, and it sounded suicidal. Issei looked around the room before smiling to Rias and lowering his voice to whisper to her briefly while the guests were unsure of how to continue. Mind if I take this? I have an idea. Rias was uncertain about allowing her boyfriend to make decisions here. On the battlefield definitely, but Issei lacked the finesse for diplomatic situations, and that was highly evident. However, before she could respond, he took her for a quick kiss and stepped forward. All eyes on him as he strode around the table confidently. Alright, so the way I see it, we are all united in purpose here. He began with his arms relaxed by his side before pointing to Irina. Irina, those Grigori assholes plan to kill people for no reason other than bringing back their old god or whatever. To that end they killed Zenobia. Whether for justice or revenge, you should join us. You can help us stop them and save millions of lives. Without allowing the Holy Templar to respond, Issei continued while pointing at Ravel. Ravel, Riser slaughtered your friends and wanted to kill you too. He wants to sacrifice you for his own gain. With us you can train yourself stronger and stop him. You can avenge yourself and your friends. We are your best shot for that. His vision then turned to Marie and Sebastian. Kokobile destroyed both of your home, killed your father and unleashed demons onto the city that you both lived in and I assume you held affection for. I know you don't know me, but I can tell you that by joining us you will get your shot at striking back. Issei then brought his vision across all four guests, directing his words to each.
I'm not saying that any of you have to join Ria's peerage or anything. I'm just saying work with us. Train with us, and then when the time comes, fight with us.
Issei looked at the confused faces around the room.
Aquino and Rias looked shocked by both the offer he made and how well he stated it, even if it did discard almost all devil protocol.
Kiba and Asia appeared to agree with Issei while Sarah and Kaneko were indifferent.
Neither of them were particularly keen to face hordes of demons again. Sarah in particular found facing the imps largely disturbing.
Zeoticus and Venelana looked bemused by the brash actions of the scion. To the head of House Gramarye, Issei never failed to amuse him in his brazen actions and sincerity.
Rias opened her mouth to begin stating all the reasons why Issei couldn't make sure an offer when Irina's voice spoke up.
I accept. All eyes landed on the human girl. I am only human after all.
I don't possess the abilities, strength or speed of yourselves or angels, but through training with you all I might succeed.
I have already seen Issei's power when Zenobia and I tried to duel him.
And to hear Lord Michael say that Issei could best him, well, I have never heard him say something like that before.
Rias' objections died with that acceptance. Perhaps Issei's approach had been useful.
Sebastian looked to Marie. It was clear to all that he would defer the choice to the Lady Lubarton and follow her lead. The lady in question looked first to Rias and then up to the muscular form of the scion standing before her. She had to admit that she found the warrior to be imposing. There was an air around him that made his arrogant bravado seem believable, like it could really be done. If she could really gain the strength, then she shouldn't she? Marie's sight dropped from Issei and she appeared in thought before looking around and back up. I want to avenge my father, my house, my people. She began before looking over to Kaneko. I wanted to do that back at the mansion. Kaneko held her eye contact. The younger girl stood by her decision. She knew that Kokobile would kill the young woman easily.
Marie continued.
I am not sure if you are foolhardy or really as powerful as you claim. I have no reference to what you can actually do other than the footage against the Golden Fighter, but even that was amazing, devastating beyond belief, but amazing.
And so I accept your offer. Issei smirked and looked at Ravel. The Phoenix girl held his gaze.
I will not forgive my brother. I saw how strong this peerage became in the 2 weeks before the rating game. You are the first and only person to ever beat my brother without him throwing the fight for political gain. So I accept. With her words spoken, Issei gave the room a broad grin and thumbs up to everyone and no one specifically at the same time.
Well, awesome. We are all in agreement then.
So how about we all pack our stuff and head over to the clubhouse? We will fire up the gravity chamber and get training while the plans get sorted on what to do next.
Issei was confident in this step and excited to get back to pushing himself further, but as he turned to leave the room without waiting for an acknowledgement, Ria's voice stopped him. Issei, you're forgetting something. Issei turned to face her and Aquino, who both wore looks similar to the evil smiles they had given him this morning, and Issei frowned. What could he have forgotten? He had eaten. They discussed everything and came up with a plan that saw them getting stronger and dealing with their enemies. What else could there be? His face fell as he realized it while Rias spoke. We still need to go see your parents. Suddenly Issei felt far less excited. Doorstep, 19 Hyoto Lane, Koho Town. It was close to midday as Issei stood outside the front door of the house he had known as home for his whole life. He wore casual clothes, black chino pants, sneakers, a white singlet and orange jacket that was open. His tail wrapped around his waist in the belt-like fashion that had become completely normal and natural for him as he moved around. Behind him stood both Rias and Aquino in the same casual clothing that they had worn to breakfast. Tight dark leggings with a red skirt and white halter top for Aquino, flat shoes on her feet, while Rias wore a white dress with a yellow and blue floral design. Issei had been standing stock still in the same position for over a minute while internally debating and deciding how best to deal with this less than wanted situation. After arriving back in the human world further up the street in an alleyway, Issei had checked his phone to find a barrage of missed calls and messages from his mother. They dated over the last few days. Evidently cellular signal didn't travel to hell. His dad had sent only a few messages. Clearly both parents worried about him and wondered where exactly he was. His father seemed certain that he was fine. Both noted that the school hadn't seen him since Thursday last week and that a police report had been filed. With it being a school day, the remainder of their group had stayed in the Gremery mansion and awaited for Issei, Rias and Aquino to have their discussion with his parents before they would then arrive. Going straight to the clubhouse might be difficult without Rias present. Venelana also noted that Rias was clearly identifiable in the footage circulating the internet. None knew the fallout that they were possibly going to face at school. So much was uncertain now that the supernatural world had been unveiled in such an abrupt and violent manner. Discussions were being held with all heads of government, and in this matter the Satans of Hell and Lord Michael had been united. Rias didn't know if Azazel was involved or whether the actions of the rogue Grigori had pushed the rest of the Grigori to further political isolation. Checking her phone had confirmed that footage of Issei's fight actions in Lima and the demon outbreak in Paris were plastered all over social media and news sites. She assumed that it was likely that her classmates would be able to identify her and Issei. That was a concern, but for now, Issei's parents were the first they had to deal with. Issei remained stood at the front door of his family's home. The same one that he had been sharing with Rias and Aquino, as well as Sarah recently. Should he just enter or knock first? He felt so uncertain, and this was definitely a postillon he didn't expect to find himself in. He could feel the stares of his girlfriends on his back. Maybe this would all have been easier if he had told his parents about his unexpected evolution when it had first occurred. But would they have allowed him to train, or be with Rias and her peerage? He was certain that his mother would have objected, but his father might have let him. The man was generally more laid back. Issei felt frustrated by his indecisiveness and responded by mentally berating himself to just man up and deal with what was to come. To that end, he raised his hand and rapped his knuckles on the hardwood front door of his home. 3 knocks resounded through the house, and Issei grimaced slightly to himself as the wood cracked where his knuckles had struck, paint chipped away from under his flesh. He had restricted himself so heavily. Was he that much stronger now? The sound of approaching feet reached Issei's ears. They struck the floorboards from within the house at a pace that let him know that the person was hurrying down the hallway. He could feel 2 key signatures in the house and felt slightly embarrassed to realize that he couldn't yet identify his parents apart by their signature. He had developed the skill after they had already departed Japan. However, he was certain that the signature moving toward him was his mother. The door flew open and she stood before him. While his mother usually dressed conservatively when spending the day home from work, now she wore a cardigan and stretchy pants that he usually saw her in before bed. Her eyes were puffy and swollen, a clear indicator of recent crying. Her brown hair disheveled and put only into a rough bun, as if the minimum effort was afforded to ensure the hair remained out of her face. On seeing him, the woman's expression shifted instantaneously from sadness to relief, and she screamed out his name while simultaneously throwing herself at him, her arms wrapping around his torso and face burying into his shoulder while she sobbed and incoherently cried about her baby boy being missing, her worry and subsequent relief as seeing him again. Issei was taken aback briefly, his arms wrapped around and held his mother. He noted how his height had increased since becoming a saiyan. Previously, he had only barely been taller than his mother. Now the top of her head came in line with his shoulder blade. While he held her, he could hear further footsteps now hurrying along and the key of his father moving rapidly toward him. No doubt his father had heard his mother's shout in response to seeing him. His father came into view at the end of the hall, and Issei watched as the man approached. He was dressed in similar clothes to normal, but even so, Issei could see that he had been worried. His collared shirt under his vest was unirond, and he didn't wear a belt with his pants. Clearly not intending to have left the home that day. His father's face was more stoic, yet Issei could see the worry melting away from the eyes behind his glasses. His father came up and placed a hand on his son's shoulder, and Issei noted that he was now ever so slightly taller than his father. The man's hand squeezed while he smiled at his son. The moment passed, however, and Issei's mother pulled away before her face did a complete flip and anger replaced her previous visage. "Where in all hell have you been?" the woman unleashed upon her son, who grimaced slightly at the high-pitched barrage against his ears. The look on his father's face said that neither parents were going to go easy on him. Issei reached up and scratched the back off his head in the manner that endeared him so highly to the two young devil women standing behind him. "Well, can we come in first, then while I can explain?" Issei asked with a coy smile. This was going to be a lot to unpack for his parents in one go. Confusion covered his mother's face. Issei stepped back, realizing that being in the doorway, he was blocking both Rias and Aquino from view. "All right," he replied with another nervous chuckle. As he stepped away, his parents' vision fell on the two beautiful young women standing behind their son. "Mom, Dad, allow me to introduce you to Rias Gremory and Aquino Himojima," Issei stated while waving a hand to each girl in turn. His parents took in the vision of each girl who waved and curtsied as Issei mentioned their name. "A pleasure to meet you," Rias responded. "Very nice to meet you both. From Aquino." His parents seemed dumbstruck for a moment before his mother replied, "They are friends of yours, Issei." "Well, I'll explain inside, Mum," Issei said with another nervous head scratch before deciding to move this meeting along from the front door and strode into the building. His parents didn't stop him as Issei removed his shoes and made his way into the lounge room with both his girlfriends following him into the building. "You have a lovely home, Mrs. Hayadu," Rias offered as she passed Issei's mother. "Thank you," the confused woman responded as the gorgeous redhead passed her by. Both his parents shared a confused look, each amazed by how beautiful the two young women were with their son. His mother closed the front door and followed with his father into the lounge room to find Issei sat on the couch with each girl on either side of him with an arm around each one. His mother noted how intimately the girls were sitting to her son and gave a look to his father, who was still trying to recover from how attractive the two young women with his son were. Issei saw his parents move to the small couch adjacent to him with mixed looks of confusion, shock, relief and a desire for explanations across their faces. With it, he decided to seize the initiative and just begin. Hopefully that would make this as painless as possible and save as much time as he could. "So I take it from your messages that you both saw the footage going around the internet?" Issei asked toward his parents as he leant forward, his arms leaving the girls beside him as he did so. Neither would interject unless it was needed. This was really for Issei to explain. Issei knew his parents, or at least his mum, had seen it from her erratic messages. His mother's eyes instantly focused on him at his question. "You mean the one of the two people fighting in Russia, the one in red against the one in gold?" She clarified with a tremor to her words. "Yep, that one," Issei responded. "Well, to put it bluntly, you were right in your messages, that was me. I am the guy in the red aura in the video and I did fight the guy in the golden aura." Issei let the words sink in while watching his parents. His mother seemed to struggle, although she had worried that it was him, but that man looked so close to death. And the things he was doing. Flying and shooting like things. She was getting frantic at the thought of the strangeness of what the video showed and how badly the man, who Issei was now saying was himself, looked to have been hurt. Issei simply held up his hand to stop her. "Mom, please, let me explain everything. You and Dad just sit there and after I have explained everything then ask questions." Issei put forward, his mother instantly going to object, but a squeeze on her arm from her husband had her look at him. He shared a silent moment with his wife before looking toward his son with a firm expression and nodded, "Please go on, son." Issei stood up and moved into the center of the room. He would need space for all his explanations. He started by explaining what a saiyan was, his tail unwrapping and swaying out as he did. His mother gasped as the appendage joined the air. He removed his jacket, which showed the sculpted musculature of their son in just his singlet. He explained about Drake being found within himself inside the ancient sacred gear that had moved from person to person for millennia. His mother opening her mouth to ask questions, but a squeeze from his father stopping her from interrupting. Issei explained about the night he was attacked from Rainier, his awakening of the power of Drake and his use of ki. At that he summoned and held an orb of the pure energy within his hand. It formed instantaneously, starting at the size of a tennis ball and quickly growing to that of a basketball. The key orb floated easily above his hand and rolled around as he moved his fingers. The energy contained within glowed its trademark peaceful blue-white and pulsed subtly. Issei explained about his first encounters with Rias and her group. He kept their lineage to himself. He would explain everything of himself and then move to explaining the girls after. He explained training within his mind, utilizing the ki that he could wield in a variety of ways: attacks, strength, stamina, flight, at which point he hovered into the air casually while watching his parents' eyes go from wide to almost bugging out, both their jaws dropping at the sun's casual defiance of gravity. Issei went on to explain how he learnt of techniques by watching ancient Saiyan warriors train or fight, his Gallic gun and Kaioken although not demonstrating them. His ability to sense life and training in enhanced gravity with weighted clothing. As Issei spoke more and more, he became further animated. The ki ball in his hand dissipating at the snap of his fingers and his body assuming fighting stances as he gave overviews of the adventures that he had been on. Facing Rainer's group, hunting rogue devils, fighting Riser and his peerage during the raiding game, and finally the confrontation with Biko and Valley. His animated nature became more so when discussing fighting Biko, and parts of his white aura threatened to flare into existence. The house beginning to rattle and small items losing their fight against gravity as well. Issei felt a hand slip into his and looked to see Rias beside him. He smiled to her, instantly the shaking ending and his aura dissipating. With his explanation complete, he paused but kept his hand up to prevent questions before smirking and turning to his parents fully. Well, that's everything about myself, but I haven't explained the two beautiful girls with me other than a few tertiary mentions, so to put it simply, other than saving my life when we first met, Rias and Aquino are both devils from hell and also my girlfriends. I love them both, and they me. Issei declared bluntly with a confident smile and another scratch at the back of his head. Now that he was silent, a thick stillness filled the air. Clearly this had been a mountain of information for his parents to take in. It was his mother who responded first. The woman was obviously struggling with processing everything her son had thrust onto them. All the adventures, fights and changes he had undergone through the past few months. So she did what was natural for someone to do in such a situation and grasp onto the piece of information that she could process. "You are dating one of these girls?" She clarified to Issei slowly, to which he simply shook his head. "Not quite. I am dating both of them." This confirmation seemed to shock his mother further, but the look on his father's face was clearly a mixture of shock, confusion, and if Issei was seeing it properly, a touch of fatherly pride. The woman appeared to be unable to process anything further, and the idea that her son was dating two astoundingly beautiful girls at the same time was all that was needed to push her further over the edge. Issei stood quietly waiting while his mother babbled nonsense words and began to wave her arms in a flailing motion toward nothing in particular. With a passive look to Rias, the Grammariaris stood up and indicated for him to sit down. Issei took his spot beside Aquino. "I know this is a lot to take in," Rias began, which captured his mother's attention as she focused on the red-haired girl now speaking before her. Rias continued undeterred. "But please know that both Aquino and I love your son very much. We are totally devoted to him, as we all are to each other." Rias' words were heartfelt, however Issei's mother focused on looking at the girl who stood in front of her before the spark of recognition clicked. "You are the girl in the video with Issei," she stated. Rias nodded. "That is correct. I am the one who was with him in Moscow." Issei's father spoke up. "And you are a devil. Like a devil from hell," he said in clarification. Rias indicated for Aquino to stand beside her. "That's right. We both are." As her words left her lips, both girls' large black bat-like wings erupted from their backs, and Issei's parent stared in wide-eyed awe at the winged girls before them. Rias then continued. "Please don't be frightened. Yes, we are both devils. Yes, my family resides in hell, however neither of us mean anyone here harm. My family has been protecting the region of Kaiotown for quite a long time, and we intend to continue to do so." Once again his parents went quiet while attempting to process the new information that was delivered to them quite abruptly. Although Rias at least displayed a bit more tact than their son. Issei's father was the one to break the silence though. Why didn't you respond to us, son? This is a lot, but couldn't you have at least let us know that you were safe? Issei felt his face redden with guilt at his father's question. The eyes of both his parents on him. He stood up and took up a position beside Akino. Well, I would have, but after the fight with Biko, I was unconscious. Rias took me to hell so that I could receive treatment. I only woke up this morning, and while I didn't exactly have cell coverage there. Issei explains simply. His mother looked further distraught by the idea of her son being unconscious for days. His father, however, continued, "You were in hell?" It was both a statement and question. Issei nodded simply, "Yeah. At Ria's family's mansion. Hell is a lot nicer than you would imagine. It looks like Earth, but some of the colors are different. It has its own sky and sun and moon. Everything we have here. In fact, her family's home is really beautiful." Issei explained honestly. His compliments of the Gremory mansion earned a happy smile from the mentioned heiress. "But what about all the brimstone and tortured souls and stuff?" his father asked, thinking back to church services. Issei actually had no answer to that. He had never seen anything like that in hell, and now that he thought of it, hell had been completely different to how he always imagined it. "I can answer those questions." Rias put forward with a smile, her and Akino's wings comfortably folding over themselves and into their backs. "The place you are referring to, depicted in the Bible and scripture, is the abyss. Home of demons and the damned. It is often mistaken for hell, but is a completely different plane of existence. We devils live in a manner similar to Earth with magic in hell. I am led to believe there is very few differences between our home in hell and the angels' home in heaven. However, I have never been there and so couldn't confirm for you." Rias put forward happily. "But aren't devils demons?" Issei's father blurted out, although once he saw the look that flashed across Akino's face he realized that he might have been offensive. Rias held her facial expressions in a more controlled. She expected these sort of questions. It was a lot for humans to take in. It had been easier with Issei, as the scion hadn't been too fazed by the intricacies of social hierarchies as long as he could focus on his goals. "Not at all." Rias responded, "We devils are a counterpoint to angels. They preach selflessness and communal actions. We promote self-reliance and self-interest. That would be the main differences. But the demons you are thinking of are for the most part mindless and violent creatures. They seek chaos and to kill, but follow little more than base instincts and often lack comprehensive intelligence. They are not welcome in hell any more than they are in heaven or on earth." Rias finished her explanation and Issei's father looked apologetically at the two girls. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend." Both girls returned a polite smile at the man's apology. It was clear that he hadn't meant to offend. Over the next few hours the group discussed everything that had occurred and the state of life that was reality for them all now. Issei's mother took longer to absorb and accept the information than his father. However, after having a cup of tea placed in her hands from Akino, the girl having gone and helped herself to making refreshments for them all, she became far more able to take everything in. Lunchtime came and went as the discussion of all the changes that had occurred continued. Grafia's involvement in the promotion of both his parents was revealed, as well as the living arrangement of the trio. When Issei explained that both his girlfriends had been living with him for weeks, his mother became concerned while his father gave him a sly look that Issei returned and then instantly looked away. The mention of Sarah living with them seemed to calm his mother as she instantly became starry-eyed at the idea of Issei caring for the young girl. Issei shuddered at the idea that his mother might start ranting about future grandchildren at any moment. The last topic of discussion covered was that of the current situation. The demonic attack on Paris, Grigori involvement in Lima and Biko in Moscow. Rias made it abundantly clear that both Issei's parents were now considered value members to the Gremory household and that a watch would be placed to ensure that both would remain safe. Their work would be compensated for. Rias was confident that Grafia would leverage her considerable sway to have both his parents placed on some form of paid leave or work-from-home situation until they could resume regular commutal work safely. They both thanked her for her concern. Issei's fidgeting and bouncing legs took the attention of his parents. "Sit still, Issei. His mother snapped at him.
Sorry mom, the scion responded to giggles from his girlfriends. It is just that we have been talking for quite a while and I am feeling incredibly restless. I know it sounds strange, but being a scion means I constantly have the urge to train to get stronger or to fight more powerful opponents.
That or eat. Issei explained with a laugh at the final comment he put on.
Issei's mother was unsure how to take her son's response and found the explanations of the two devils far more easy to understand than her son's of what had happened to him. His father seemed to be on the same page as her because he interjected. So I think I need more clarification, son. You said that the dragon inside you, along with the actions of Miss Gremory here, resulted in the scion blood in you becoming dominant and driving out all traces of human DNA.
Issei nodded. Yeah, that's about it. Drake explains it far greater than I can.
He has seen so much more. Main thing is either yours or mom's side of the family has a tiny iota of scion DNA that was capitalized on in my situation.
I imagine something similar happened for Biko.
I don't think there is any way in which scions could be born naturally.
Issei pondered the final words as he spoke them. Issei's father's brow frowned. Could Drake explain it to us further, his question full of curiosity?
Sure.
Issei replied while walking forward and instructing his parents to place a hand on him. Each took a hold of one of his hands.
Okay, now he will speak directly into both your minds, so don't freak out when you hear him. Each nodded. If this had been any other day they would have thought their son had gone insane, but after everything that had happened, this seemed like only a minor point.
Good afternoon, parents of Issei. I am the Red Dragon Emperor, my name is Drake. It is a pleasure to meet you both.
The looks of equal shock that crossed his parents' faces made it clear that despite the warning that he gave, neither was prepared for the great dragon's words to fill their minds.
For the next half an hour his parents spoke with the dragon, who clarified information far more efficiently than Issei possibly could. With their curiosities and queries sated, Issei moved apart from them and the telekinetic link was broken.
Issei stretched now his limbs as he moved away from his parents' contact and felt his muscles flex. This talk had gone better than he hoped.
Now it was time to train.
Well, Mom, Dad, it has been great to get all this in the open, but I really do need to go train.
Issei stated without giving further clarifications on why he needed to train so desperately.
His parents didn't need to hear that he planned to engage the man who almost killed him again.
We will be home for dinner, he added happily. The mention of food always being a positive in his view.
Before more could be said his mother replied, of course you will be home for dinner.
At 7 sharp. You have school tomorrow. I didn't raise a delinquent.
Issei stared at her for a moment. She expected him to go back to school. He was fully planning to ignore going in favor of continuing his training regime. He looked to his father, who gave him an expression that told him to let his mother have this victory without a fight.
Issei simply nodded and looked to his two girlfriends. It was really nice meeting you both, Mr. and Mrs. Hayadu. Both girls said in unison as they prepared to leave.
They had been amazed that their battle-crazed boyfriend had agreed to remain here for as long as he actually had.
Issei's parents stood up, his mother speaking first.
It has been a strange introduction, but you are both so pleasant and my son seems very much in love with each of you.
Please call me Mickey.
Issei's mother said in final introduction of herself, his father stepping forward as well with a smile to the girls. As Mickey said, it really has been a pleasure, we both look forward to getting to know you both further, please call me Goro. He said to the pair.
Thank you so much.
Each girl once again stated in tandem, earning a slight chuckle and giggle from Issei's parents.
Ria summoned the Gremory sigil of the Crimson Rose below the feet of the trio, and Issei's parent watched in amazement as the three vanished in a flash of brilliant light. It was a quick task to collect the remaining members of their now extended group who awaited in the Gremory mansion. While Akino and Ria stood, Issei ducked to the expansive and ever-stocked kitchen once more. His stomach protesting the hours without food since his monstrous breakfast.
Issei knew fully well that his mother would cook a delicate meal and he would enjoy it, but he also expected her to not be aware of his volume requirements. Upon entering, the cook simply laughed at seeing the seance return after his breakfast, and he was treated to more food left over from the lunch served for those who had remained in hell. After what he considered a light snack, Issei returned to find the group assembling in the foyer. Finally fully assembled, Ria summoned the sigil once more, and a moment later the group found themselves within the clubhouse lounge room once again after quite a while away.
Issei almost bounded out of the room to make his way to the gravity room when Akino called out.
"Issei, wait," she stated with a quiver to her voice. The scion in question spun around. He hadn't expected the nervous tone from Akino. Akino took a breath before speaking. "I know we are all here to train, but could you all please take a seat briefly? I have something I need to say first."
None argued, and once seated on the comfortable couches or floating lazily in the air in Issei's case, Akino looked to Rias.
Her look of concern confused Issei as he wasn't sure where Akino was going with this. Rias took Akino's hand in her own, and the dark-haired girl felt her resolve stiffen. "We just spent the last few hours with Issei's parents, and I feel now is the time to say something that has been on my mind for quite a while now. But more so since the rating game, as it affects us all. You see, my own family affect us all because my father is Kokobile.